Hey, welcome back. This is part two, I guess, of a two-part series. I had to cut it into half pieces. The first part, we discovered the 119th Pennsylvania's first battlefield experiences and looked at the war from the point of view of those first volunteers who went and fought with our regiment. But now we're in August 1863, and August and September 1863. We see our first major wave of draftees, volunteers who went for the bounty money. And we enter Warrenton, Virginia. So if you want to understand the man in the uniform, but would just want to look at it from the point of view of one of these new volunteers, you can start the video here. But if you want to get a good history of what this regiment did beforehand, and perhaps look at the point of view of one of the old original volunteers of this regiment, yeah, that's fine. You can listen to part one. But welcome. We're going to catch us up to the present day of Early's raid in 1864 here. So, from September to October 1863, the 6th Corps is doing a lot of moving and maneuvering to help outflank the Confederacy so they don't get the upper hand on the Army of the Potomac. So for that period of time, we leave Warrenton, Virginia, and start going on these long marches and maneuvers. So for some of the veterans, this is okay. Like, we're used to this. Like, we've marched that Gettysburg March, Misery Mountain, and all that, right? But for these new guys, this is a lot of marching right at the start of their campaign. So I could see a lot of these old veterans, like, teaching the new guys, hey, you know, this is how you march. These are some things to carry. Here's the lighter load. You know, all that stuff. But also just maybe some teasing, because they did a lot of marching in this era. But then we get to our first engagement at Rappahannock Station. All right? On November 7th, 1863, the 119th Pennsylvania and its brigade reaches Rappahannock Station, which is an entrenched Confederate fort and position along the Rappahannock River. And the order is to assault this fort and take it. Now, this is a very nerve-wracking situation for the 119th because this is a well-defended fort. The Louisiana Tigers, the infamous Tigers, are defending that fort along with some North Carolina regiments, all veterans. So the order of battle is this. We have the 6th Maine that will lead the charge across the open, almost mile-long open field to attack this Confederate fort. Next will be the 5th Wisconsin, and then the 119th. So we're waiting as the third wave for this attack. The 6th Wisconsin, we watch as the 6th Maine charges the fort in open order. It surprises the Confederacy. And the large battle cry that the 6th Maine gives as they charge across this open field towards certain death shocks the Confederacy and surprises them, and it may shock us as well. They get farther than we thought. By about the 100-yard mark, the Confederates open up on the 6th Maine, and we watch as the 6th Maine takes devastating casualties. Nonetheless, that does not stop them. The 6th Maine charges over the Confederate defenses. Then we see the 5th Wisconsin charge right behind. We're next. We're waiting to go in. We watch the 5th Wisconsin charge this open ground. They receive fire, but not as much, and cross into the fort. Colonel Elmaker orders the 119th, company shoulder, arms, charge, bayonets, charge. The 119th, in their first engagement for many of these guys, charge across an open field while giving this large battle cry. These guys wrote about how they were screaming their hearts out as they were charging across this open field, hearing the battle get closer and closer and more ferocious as they're approaching the fort, because a major melee is happening in the fort between the 6th Maine, 5th Wisconsin, and those Louisiana Tigers. As soon as we crest the fort and get into the rebel earthworks, to our right, we see a massive wall of flame and hot lead tear apart our right flank. North Carolina troops were waiting for us. They shot and lined up in a volley directly into our flank. Once again, the new captain of Company B, is killed instantly, as well as many other people in our regiment. Our 119th Pennsylvania left wheels, and in a terrifying series of face-to-face volleys with this North Carolina regiment, we drive those rebels off the field. Now, when I was reading that history and reading the soldier diaries, it was that sense of terror of face-to-face volleys, loading as fast as you can before those rebels can shoot at you, must have been very, very scary for these guys. The 119th now directs its attention towards the Louisiana Tigers, but by the time they make that decision, those Louisiana soldiers are already running for their lives. They saw the North Carolina regiment retreat, so they are routing. The Louisiana Tigers jump into the Rappahannock River because there's nowhere else for them to go. We cut them off. And a war crime ensues. The 5th Wisconsin, overlooking the water, starts shooting down at the Louisiana Tigers, who are trying to swim to safety. Some of them try to surrender, but the war lust among the 5th Wisconsin is so great that many of these Tigers are killed in armpit-deep water. So our men saw this and wrote about it. And for the next day, the 119th was tasked with burying the dead. And this was a pretty brutal situation, but it was the first combat for many of the 119th soldiers who were just drafted or volunteered. The 119th is ordered to march forward after Rappahannock Station, along with other regiments, to pursue the fleeing Confederates. They reach Mine Run. Now, Mine Run is a body of water, a creek or a river or creek, that we come across, that on the other end is defended by Confederates. The Confederates built this huge fort with massive fortifications and thousands of soldiers. In the diaries of these 119th guys, they actually commented on the beauty, the terrifying beauty of how well built this trench system was. And also the very real and scary realization of, shoot, we're going to be ordered to attack that, aren't we? Throughout December, early December 1st and 2nd, our boys are waiting in the wood line to assault Mine Run. Members of the 49th Pennsylvania, the regiment right next to us, are sewing their names into the jackets that they're wearing, expecting to be killed in this attack. George Gordon Meade called off the attack, but the soldiers on the field did not know. So many of the 119th soldiers were pretty nervous about this situation. When they were ordered to pull back, it was a relief, but very, very frustrating, because as they were waiting for the order to attack, in that fear of the unknown, that almost World War I level, like about to go over the top feeling, it was also freezing cold. The canteens of the soldiers of the 119th Pennsylvania were actually frozen. That's how freezing it was for these soldiers. And in that cold, and in that moment of despair, many people were pretty nervous and lost heart. So the frigid temperatures of Mine Run became legendary, just like Misery Mountain, right? Became legendary of the 119th. So if you're ever cold at this event, or if you're ever worried about how freezing it is not as cold as Mine Run. Nothing will ever be as cold as Mine Run. Winter camp is set up for 1863 and 1864. Our troops march back to winter camp and build huts and enjoy their second Christmas away from home. But the word enjoy is a very difficult word to use here, because these soldiers were not in the mood to celebrate. Many of them turned to alcohol for Christmas. One soldier of the 119th Company K, Private Dempsey, was actually hospitalized for the amount of alcohol he consumed on Christmas, where he died 14 days later in January. there's this somber feeling about the upcoming spring campaign among the camp of the 119th. And the 119th tries to occupy themselves with things to, get their minds off it, to distract themselves from the impending fighting that will occur. Some of them join the Regimental Glee Club, which was practiced and widespread in winter camp. Others focus on drill. But there's one thing that happens that makes the 119th quite nervous about the upcoming spring. The commanding officers of the 119th Pennsylvania, those who survived, seem to have been fighting each other, a lot of infighting among the captains. Captain Goodman of Company D, who had the largest desertion rate, by the way, wrote a formal complaint to his superiors about the lieutenant colonel of our regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Clark. Clark was drunk during the Battle of Rappahannock Station. He nearly fell off his horse, and members of Company I witnessed that. So, Goodman, who may have had it out for Clark, basically tattled on him. A court-martial occurred, and some members of the company, including Captain Latta, whose diary I depended on heavily here, actually was the defense for Clark. So, from the position of a private or an NCO in the 119th Pennsylvania, the officer corps was very cliquey. You were either pro-Goodman or pro-Clark. Clark was cashiered. He had to leave the regiment and was not allowed to come back. So he was replaced. This left many of the captains angry, while some happy. So for you, as a private, you could determine whether, if you're a man in the uniform, if you like Clark or you don't like him. It's up to you. But that was a major event that happened. Another major event that happened in winter camp was Colonel Elmaker resigned from duty. Our colonel, who fought with us at Fredericksburg, Salem's Church, the March to Gettysburg, and Rappahannock Station, is now gone. The reason why he resigned was that his son enlisted in the federal forces, and his wife needed a protector, someone to watch over. So I assume many of the soldiers, particularly those who joined for economic reasons, were quite upset at Colonel Elmaker's decision to leave and abandon the 119th Pennsylvania for watching and taking care of his wife, when so many of these guys fighting the elements and snowstorms of winter camp are not allowed to go back to their families. Henry Truefitt becomes our colonel, and Truefitt will lead us into the bloody spring, the Overland Campaign. And as it is getting closer, a sense of dread is among the 119th Pennsylvania. But some optimism, because in late April, the leader of the whole U.S. Armed Military Forces here, particularly the Army of the Potomac, was Ulysses S. Grant. And on April 27th, the 119th Pennsylvania paraded for Grant. They wore white gloves and everything. And his victories at Fort Donelson and his victories out west may have provided some hope and some guidance and good feeling towards this campaign. At least we have someone who wins. Then May came. During the Battle of the Wilderness, our regiment suffered some serious losses. The 119th crossed the Rappahannock on either May 3rd or May 4th. I'm not going to check that. But on May 5th, was it May 5th or 6th? The type of fighting that the 119th Pennsylvania endured was typical of those who fought in the wilderness. It was chaos. As we were posted into the woods, as we were marching towards the battlefield, it was very common to see discarded items strewn along the road. New recruits and draftees ditching their blankets, their greatcoats, their haversacks because it was too heavy for the march, or because it's Virginia and the heat is not going to, I don't need the blanket with this heat. So the soldiers are marching by all of these discarded items. The closer the 119th gets to the battlefield, the more horror they see. They march over a scorched forest, a part of the wilderness that was, under a scorched fire from a forest fire started by the battle. And they witnessed the crisped and scorched corpses of the wounded who tried to escape the fire but couldn't. So even before the fighting, some of these 119th guys saw the horror of this engagement. Rebels were heard in the woods as soon as the 119th was posted into line of battle, but they couldn't see the Confederates. So Colonel Truefitt ordered the regiment to fire volleys towards the direction of where they believe the Confederates are. The Confederates did the same. And in this terrifying experience of firing volleys at someone you cannot see and receiving fire from someone you cannot see, the 119th was ordered forward. The 119th climbed over those who were killed or wounded in these volleys. It was very difficult for them to keep a straight line in these woods, so there were different clumps and groups of soldiers in little squads as they're marching forward through this wooded area. And as the smoke clears from their previous volley fire, they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. A swamp lies ahead of them. And at the end of the swamp, on the other side, is an entrenched Confederate position. The Confederates, who were just as surprised to see the Union soldiers march there, unleashed a devastating volley. And the soldiers of the 119th, especially the veterans, knew what was about to happen. Many 119th people were hit, and they fell on the ground there. The 119th dispersed, grabbed cover, and returned fire at this Confederate trench, and it lasted for quite a while. But with a Confederate counterattack, the 119th was drawn to retreat. And the rest of the Battle of the Wilderness was the 119th digging trenches, expecting to be attacked. And in this foreshadowing moment, the entire month of May will be like this. The soldiers wrote in their diary they only did one of three things at a time: march, fight, or dig. There's no room for sleep. The 119th Pennsylvania, for the next couple of days, are marching, fighting, or digging. There's exhaustion. They are tired. However, they are very relieved to find out that after the Wilderness, they are not withdrawing. They are staying on the rebel line. Grant is ordering an advance, not a retreat. Many of the men of the 119th see this as a hopeful thing. Finally, we're going to rip the Band-Aid off. This is going to hurt, but we'll end the war this month. This will do it. There was that attitude, and it was pretty prevalent among many of the soldiers, that the heavier the fighting, the more we're engaged with the Confederacy, the sooner this war will end. The next engagement is Spotsylvania Courthouse. Grant orders the 6th Corps, including the 119th, to capture and hold a crossroads so Lee couldn't get it at Spotsylvania Courthouse. When the Corps arrived there, the Confederacy got to the courthouse first. Not only did they get there first, but they got there in time to dig almost impenetrable defensive line of trenches. And then the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse commenced. On May 10th, they were ordered to take the breastworks. Upton of a New York regiment and the brigadier general that the 119th was belonging to, Russell, organized and planned for an attack on this fort. How were they going to do it? They knew it was going to be destructive and deadly. As many of you may know, Upton's Charge is a very famous moment in Civil War history. The 119th belongs to the third column in this push. The idea was, and the plan was, for all of the soldiers, similar to Rappahannock Station. Remember that? We've done it at Rappahannock Station before. Line the regiments up in columns. But instead of sending one at a time, they're all going to push forward. And each regiment has a specific job. I believe it was the 49th Pennsylvania, one of our units that we've been fighting with the whole war. The 49th Pennsylvania was supposed to veer off and attack the Confederate artillery. The Vermont Brigade behind us, the Vermont regiments, were ordered to remain in the rear in reserve, but put fire on the rebels when needed. As our boys were in the woods waiting for orders, the 119th was ordered to charge across the open ground. In column, they were ordered not to stop and shoot. Basically, break every instinct in the human body when being shot at. They were told, you have to keep running and maintain formation. Do not stop, do not shoot, do not run and take cover. Keep running, keep charging towards the trench. And the 119th was ordered to go to the rebel breastworks and secure them. When these orders were given, the men were very, very scared. Colonel Beckwith of the 121st New York wrote in his diary about this type of feeling before the attack, quote, "Felt my gorge rise, and my stomach and intestines shrink together in a knot, and 1,000 things rushed through my mind. Next, the lines rose, moved noiselessly to the edge of the woods, and then, with a wild cheer and faces averted, rushed the works. Through a terrible front and flank fire, the column advanced, while nearly half of our front line was shot down before we reached the pits." End quote. When the 119th charged across this field, their entire left flank was under fire and completely exposed by the Virginians who were entrenched in the fort. The left flank of the 119th Pennsylvania was virtually erased and ceased to exist because they were shot by canister and musket fire. The line buckled towards the center because the men in the left flank were trying to avoid this flanking fire and fighting every instinct to just stop and take cover. I cannot put into words and overstate that the bravery that it took for the 119th to actually do what they did. They stayed in formation, and it seemed to work. The 119th Pennsylvania made it to the breastwork. The following is from the Regimental History, describing the fighting that happened right at the rebel breastworks. Quote, "In probably less than a minute, the front line reached the enemy works. Here occurred a deadly hand-to-hand conflict. The enemy sitting in their pits with pieces upright, loaded, and with bayonets fixed, ready to impale the first who should leap over, absolutely refused to yield the ground. The first of our men who tried to surmount the works fell pierced through the head by musket balls. Others, seeing the fate of their comrades, held their pieces at arm's length and fired downwards, while others, poising their pieces vertically, hurled them down upon their enemy, pinning them to the ground. Lieutenant Johnson of the 121st New York received a bayonet wound through the thigh. Private O'Donnell of the 96th Pennsylvania Volunteers was pinned to the parapet, but was rescued by his comrades. A private of the 5th Maine, having bayoneted a rebel, was fired at by a captain who, missing his arm, in turn shared the same fate. The brave men fell by a shot from the rebel lieutenant. The struggle lasted but a few seconds. Numbers prevailed, and like a restless wave, the column poured over the works, quickly putting out of combat those who resisted, and sending to the rear those who surrendered, pressing forward and expanding to the right and left the second line of entrenchments, its line of battle, and the battery fell into our hands. The column of assault had accomplished its task. The enemy's line were completely broken. The battle, however, had just begun. End quote. For the rest of the day, Robert E. Lee is going to send 5 counterattacks to retake the position that the 119th has captured. Some of the men in the 119th were recorded of firing over 200 shots out of their rifles that day. Their right shoulders limp from the recoil of their rifles, and black and blue and bruised. Defending the works was very costly for the 119th. An overwhelming number of NCOs, non-commissioned officers, were killed, including First Sergeant John Lawrence. Remember the man who fled his home state of North Carolina to join the 119th Pennsylvania? He was finally punished by his rebel family and killed right there on the Confederate works. Expecting assistance, the 119th and the other regiments in Upton's Charge desperately held the works until that help didn't come. Frustratingly, the 119th pulled back across the field that they sacrificed so greatly for. That night, something remarkable happened. As the 119th was licking their wounds, a Confederate brass band walked over to the works and played Nearer My God to Thee. Upon hearing this, a Union brass band came over to the edge of the wood line where we charged from earlier that day and played the Death March, a funeral military march. To respond to this, after the Union band finished, the Confederate band played Bonnie Blue Flag, and a rebel yell and a cheer came afterwards. To respond finally to end the night, the Union brass band played the Star Spangled Banner, and upon hearing it, a great cheer came along the Union soldiers. That very next day, the 119th was exposed to picket fire, but they would be thrown right back into the cauldron on May 12th when Grant ordered the attack on the Bloody Ankle. They will do the same thing again. The 119th Pennsylvania is charging across this open ground, attacking the Confederate trenches, but they are in a fortunate position. There is a grassy knoll that many of the soldiers are able to take cover behind. And for the rest of the day, until 3 in the morning, the 119th will be pinned in that spot under Confederate fire. But they would have a perfect view and a vantage point of the Bloody Ankle. And many of the soldiers in their diaries wrote about this and wrote about the horror that they saw. They witnessed in the pouring rain thousands of Union and Confederate soldiers club each other to death, fire point blank into each other's heads. They witnessed as those who were killed on the breastworks get flattened because of the volley fire. They also witnessed both sides trying to surrender, waving white flags, but getting killed by their assailants. They also watched as the rebel defenders were killed or wounded almost to the last man, only to be reinforced by more screaming Confederates coming across the woods to try to retake the Bloody Ankle. Many of these men were reminded of the horrors of Gettysburg and the dead that they saw there, but nothing in the entire war will compare to what the 119th witnessed that day and the next day, when they were able to witness the dead and those killed in that fighting. Typically, Civil War battles didn't continue into the nighttime, but this one did, and it was just as fierce. The Confederate dead were 5 deep, and the Union dead were bloated and wet from the torrential downpour still happening. The 119th will not forget what they saw. When the Battle of Spotsylvania ended, the 119th went into the campaign in May with 500 soldiers. After Spotsylvania, only 250 remained. Upton's Charge, particularly, was the bloodiest engagement that the 119th will fight in for the entire war. And I think it is very crucial to understand, if we're going to be portraying the men and wearing this uniform, we need to be aware of what our troops have went through already. They have been to Spotsylvania. And all throughout that month of May, these guys have not stopped to sleep. They barely stopped to sleep. Remember? Dig, march, fight. They will be doing the same until June 1st with the Battle of Cold Harbor. The 119th at Cold Harbor assaulted the rebel trench line and even took the rebel trenches at Cold Harbor and held it as desperately as they could. For 12 days straight, the 119th was stuck in the trenches, unable to lift their heads above, or else they would be killed by Confederate sharpshooters. On June 3rd, the 119th actually participated in Grant's full assault on the Confederate trenches, Grant's equivalent of Pickett's charge. The 119th took many casualties, not as much as Spotsylvania, but the 119th recalled how devastating this battle was. The 119th witnessed many regiments, particularly New Jersey regiments, getting eviscerated in this trench warfare. And it, again, made a mark on this unit. So if we're portraying the 119th Pennsylvania, we are hardened veterans who are now in this almost proto-World War I mentality of wherever we go, we have to dig. All right? So, when the Overland Campaign ended, the 119th Pennsylvania was transported via steamer to the peninsula to assist Butler in Bermuda 100. They missed the fighting there, but the 119th was posted up at Petersburg. And their job was to entrench themselves close to the Confederate line to open up a roadway for our cavalry to go on a reconnaissance mission. The 119th did a lot of picket fighting. No real major battles occurred in this era, and we're talking June. This is the month of June, just a month before our event. We're in Petersburg, we're in the trenches, and we are along the trench line sharing it with a USCT regiment. According to Captain Lada's diary, many of our boys were relieved by USCT soldiers on picket duty. So we would have absolutely been engaging with them during this battle. But again, this is just picket action, okay? Word is given to the regiment that we should head to Washington, D.C. This is around the time of Early's raid in the Battle of Monocacy? Yeah. We take a steamer and head over to the city. On July 11th, we make our ways back to Washington, D.C., immediately exit our steamer ship, and march 4 miles to 7th Street to Fort Stevens, which is just reeling from an attack by Early's forces. As we're marching through Washington, D.C., the citizens are cheering us on. It is an impromptu parade as we're marching to battle. In particular, the black citizens of Washington, D.C. are cheering heavily for us, saying that the Red Crosses are here, and those Rebs are going to run from the Red Crosses. And with our Corps badge and all that it meant to fight under that Corps badge, hearing that validation from citizens of Washington, D.C. strengthened the backs and backbones of the 119th Pennsylvania as we marched in skirmish order to Fort Stevens. the president himself, President Lincoln, viewed as we fanned our line in front of Fort Stevens and pursued the Confederacy. From July 12th to July 15th, the week before this event, we are pursuing the Confederate soldiers. We come across Camp Atkins, that camp that we built awkwardly way back in September of 1862. Some of the surviving veterans may look at that and remember, how naive they must have felt, how much they have changed since they've constructed Camp Atkins. And by July 15th and 16th, the order was for the 119th Pennsylvania to guard and command the 6th Corps wagon train and defend any of the mountain passes from rebel cavalry. And with that, we will continue live into this event. I hope that this two-part series, or one part, whatever you heard, helped you get into the mindset of soldiers of the 119th Pennsylvania. I think it's really important when we reenact these things to consider what these people went through. And just as you're wearing the uniform and going through this highly and well-planned immersive event, that you just keep in mind that these were real people, and hopefully with their lived experiences that you just learned or heard or studied on your own, you could do your best to really just consider, wow, this unit existed. This is what they just went through. They've been through hell. They've been through the Overland Campaign. So many of their friends got killed at Spotsylvania. And they just want to end this war and go home. Thank you for listening. I'll see you all at the event this weekend. Have a safe trip. Take care.